Okay, so welcome once again to Red Clay. We are here under the auspices of the Kunsthalle Osnabrück, based in Germany. And this is the public program for the solo exhibition of Ibrahim Mahama, which opened earlier this year in July in Osnabrück. It was a large-scale installation in public space, and it lasted between July 8th and October 1st. And we had always conceptualized the project in two phases. The first in Osnabrück, the next in Ghana, because Ibrahim, the artist's interests goes beyond the temporary exhibition moment. So we wanted to find a way to connect the, maybe to be literal in our title, if it's transfers, which is, we want to consider literal, flows, currents, continuities, disjunctions, and disruptions, really, of the legacies of the politics and the histories that have shaped our present, particularly also the economics that come with it. Because we are looking at trade routes, we are looking at production systems, and if you are dealing with a capitalist structure, you are dealing really with, things that transcend immediate borders. So the commodification of everything, really. Our focus is on textiles, but it has implications for bodies. It has implications for land, geographies, and so on and so forth. So this is a gesture. If the transatlantic, economy or the migration engendered its own, brutal traumas, this is a different mobility. This is in the 21st century. What does a small project like this do, and how does it respond to some of these traumas that have shaped our collective realities? So we're here under that umbrella with Ibrahim's practice, which also shifts into a little bit more emancipatory dimensions, but we want to test them in these small ways to see. So we've been, since the past 2 days, unpacking a few of the knots that we have initiated through this project, and we've had different perspectives responding to this. We've had some contentions, we've had debates, we've had agreements, we've had entertainment so far, and it's ongoing until tomorrow. So thank you for joining us. If you are here at Red Clay, thank you for joining us online, anywhere you are in the world. Greetings to you. This morning we have a lecture by Professor Akosua Adomako, which will continue in the same spirit as we have it, and the lecture is titled "Exchanging Our Country Marks: Emancipated Futures in Solidarity." So I will proceed to introducing her, and then we give her the space. Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo is Professor of African and Gender Studies at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. Her areas of interest include African knowledge systems and decolonizing knowledge and praxis, higher education, race and identity politics, gender relations, masculinities, and popular culture. She describes herself as an activist scholar, and her work is informed by her faith, questions of identity and power, and a commitment to social justice. In 2022, she co-produced the documentary When Women Speak with Kate Skinner, and directed by Aseye Tamakloe as part of the project Archive of Activism, Gender and Public History in Postcolonial Ghana. Adomako Ampofo is the founding vice president and immediate past president of the African Studies Association of Africa and a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's currently the Wangari Maathai Visiting Professor at the University of Kassel. Shall we welcome her with a round of applause?
Kwasi, thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to even be in this space with all of you. It's really a privilege. Yes, I am a lecturer, so I tend to talk, but I'll give you some images. And to say that this morning's presentation is really in the spirit of solidarity, right? Sharingness, and sharingness, what did I do? Okay. Sharing our pain and understanding our pain, and sharing our understanding of our shared humanity, right? And so it's more of a clarion call to all of us that the times and the spaces that we live in, if we don't get that, the destruction is going to happen to all of us, right? So anyway, I took the Exchanging Our Country Marks from a book by an African-American colleague called Michael Gomez. And when we think of transfers, there's obviously an element of movement, could be an element of exchange, and there could be space for solidarity. And Gomez's work is about the slave resistances just before the quote-unquote civil rights war in the US, right? And he focuses on the immediate first generation of enslaved people who came to the US and how they came with their ethnic identities. And he starts the story by telling us, and I'm going to read a little bit here, about an uprising in Charleston, South Carolina in 1822. And so allow me to read this. In 1822, a 55-year-old seafarer, born in either Africa or the West Indies, it wasn't entirely clear, attempted to destroy the very foundations of American slave-holding capitalist culture. His name was Denmark Vesey, and he constructed an insurrection, right, against slaveholding. And basically, what he sought to do was to bring together different groups of enslaved peoples into armies. And he had two armies, one led by an Igbo from Nigeria, who came with his own skills as a warrior, and somebody who by his name, Gomez thinks, came from the Congo part of Africa, right? And even slaves who had been born in the US joined in this movement. Now, what he sought to de-emphasize, what Denmark sought to de-emphasize was the differences. So it's like, okay, you have your ethnic identities that you've come with that are extremely important to you. But this fight that we are fighting, we have to fight it together. One of the reasons Gomez suggests that they ultimately were unsuccessful is that they didn't pay sufficient attention to difference. So in trying to create this oneness, there was a way in which inadvertently they erased difference, but our differences are also important to us. You can't expect me to throw my ethnic identity and what it means away. We have to do the oneness by working with our differences and working them into it. And anybody who's interested can read Gomez's work, but I use this as a metaphor for what I'm suggesting is the only way that in the times that we live in that are dire, that are problematic, and that are difficult for the arts is the only way that we're going to have our communal survival. So I'm suggesting that the arts and all of us who are embodied and our existence is built into the arts, whether we know this or not, there's an endangerment that is going on. For us in Ghana, that endangerment is very real because for many years, art, music, history have not been in the curriculum. So you do a little bit of it when you're in primary school. When you're in junior secondary school, you may have something included in social studies, but it hasn't been there. This is not how I was educated, okay? And then you get to senior secondary school, and then, yeah, if you're good in painting, maybe they will suggest, okay, go and do, what is it, fine arts? What is it called in SS? Visual arts, okay, all right. So you might do visual arts, but you don't have the opportunity to have the kind of learning that we've heard from our colleagues that they've had from Caricature and Bernard and Company. It's non-existent, and it's not my field, but even I know that. And I struggled with my own children who, at least one of them was gifted artistically, to encourage her that this is something that you can take and move forward, because she kept getting discouraged. You're not coloring within the lines, all that kind of nonsense, right? And this, I mean, I knew enough that this is not what art is about. Let me locate my own positionality. You've heard a little bit from Kwasi's introduction. My formative training professionally was in architecture. Thanks to a military coup, it was truncated. So I was almost at the end of my first year of postgraduate training, when the universities were closed for almost a year. My sister was living in Germany. I said, let me go and join my sister and seek my fortune. I ended up in development planning, and I came back and I'm like, forget architecture, I'm not interested. I want to deal with people's social experiences. And of course, as a child, all of us experience injustice. And one of the things I'm sure every child has said at some point is not fair. It's not fair, right? But as you get older, people try to tell you that, Charlie, that's how life is like. This is the real world. Be realistic, be practical. But it's troublesome because it sits on you. So anyway, areas of, struggles for freedom have been a part of my DNA, I think also from my upbringing. My grandfather, for those of you from outside Ghana, we have Kwame Nkrumah comes from the Convention People's Party tradition. In the Asante region of Ghana, the CPP were not very welcomed because the Asante region, being the richest region and something of a hegemony, eventually wanted to have their own space. So my grandfather, being an Asante, living in Kumasi and being a rich merchant, and joining the CPP was seen as a traitor, and there were a couple of attempts on his life. So we grew up with that history, knowing it, military rule, you go on the streets. As a feminist activist, when there were a series of murders of women, you go on the streets, you do petitions, you ask for passage of domestic violence legislation and so on. So I see my scholarship linked to the reality of people's lives in that way. And I see the classroom as an activist space where you can see some transformation in your students, right? And I want to read a little bit from Kwame Nkrumah's speech that he gave when the Institute of African Studies was formed in 1962. This speech was in 1963. It has been called the African Genius. And we pull that speech out of our pockets every time when the Institute of African Studies is being attacked. So let me take some steps back. When the University of Ghana was created in 1948, we all know this was a colony, it was a British creation. We had universities on the African continent for years prior to that, right? But now colonialism has come. We have these European institutions. post-independence, Nkrumah recognizes that, being a pragmatist, we're not going to do away with these institutions, right? So how can we decolonize them? And one of the ways that we can do that is to have an Institute of African Studies that is specifically mandated to study people's lives from African-centered ways. This is not to throw away knowledge that comes from other places, but it is to recognize that there are certain ways of seeing and knowing and understanding that are particularly part of our sociocultural lives. Let me give you an interesting example of an experience that one of my former directors had, Professor George Hagan. George Hagan did his PhD, Oxford or Cambridge, one of them. And as a fresh student, they were at dinner. In those days, people were wined and dined. It was not austerity like today. And they were seated, and he served everybody with water, or served himself first with water, and drank. And then one of his British colleagues sitting next to him said, "Hey, over here, we don't do that. So we serve other people first." And then he said, "Actually, where I come from, you have to taste it first to make sure that what you're taking is good. All right? That you're not giving to somebody else something that's inappropriate, that might even be poisoned." Of course, George Hagan didn't think that water was poisoned, but he was conveying a message that there are different ways in which we understand each other's humanity and how we share with them and how we make sure that they are okay. You may have yours and I have mine. It doesn't make mine wrong. It doesn't make yours wrong, but it means that we have to understand each other's ways of doing this. And so Nkrumah talks about a society that is not static and dynamic, but is dynamic, and in which everyone is assured of equal opportunities. And then he goes on to say, somewhere in the end of this speech, that his vision for education, and this is his mandate to us at the Institute, that education must be, he charges us that, yeah, education is an opportunity for upward mobility, right? But it's not just about the money in your pocket. Education must also be measured in terms of the soundness of a man's judgment of people and things, and in his power to understand and appreciate the needs of his fellow men and to be of service to them. Service was supposed to be embedded in our mission, and that service should be appropriate to the needs of the people that we are working with. And then he asks us what kind of students we are preparing to go out into the world to make that difference and to be that kind of a person. So there are difficult conversations that we have to have. Kwasi alluded to some of that. So I want you to look at these images for a moment. I'm going to have another slide that I've put some words on, and look at those also for a few minutes, and then I'll pause and I'll ask you guys what resonated with you the most. Maybe something triggered you. Maybe something gave you hope. Maybe something gave you a plan that there's something that I can do. So these are my images of where I'm coming from, some things that trouble me, but also some things that give me hope. What are yours going to be? And when those of you who want to speak have spoken, then I'll tell you one of my pet ones. So get ready, because people are going to talk from their hearts, I hope. Are we good? Okay, so who would like to share something, anything?
Yeah, one that immediately spoke to me is the quote on the right side, on the upper right side. You can never leave. I'm reading it because I think you cannot read it back then. No. Yeah, because this is something I feel recently. We're being really over careful in some of our discussions, and then in the end, the hardcore conversations only happen online, and the respective insultations, and and I think we have to definitely work on that. Mm.
Anybody else? It doesn't have to be from the images or from the list.
I can't see that much, but I can see visa denied. And I believe if you took the photo yourself, it was maybe your visa. I have an adopted son. He's Ghanaian. He's my nephew, and it's quite a funny situation because for a long time I struggled to get the Ghanaian passport, and have a Ghanaian father and a German mother, and then for my son who has Ghanaian mother and Ghanaian father to get a German visa to travel with me. At this time, we didn't really figure out the paper, issues with, custody and so on. So it was a almost traumatic experience to apply for a visa for him. And then in the same time, I had to prove to Ghana that I'm Ghanaian because I have a German name in my passport. Because in Ghana, you would get the last name from the father. So for me, looking at this, it brings out so many memories and contradictions in what kind of world we are living in. And people think, because it's Germany, I immediately want to bring him there and have him living in Germany. But for my thinking, a liberate mind, of a young black man has to be strong and rooted in where he comes from to understand who he is. So when he goes out in the world, he's prepared. And for my thinking, for him growing up in Germany is absolutely wrong. But that's what they see. Like they see a white woman and a black boy, and she's bringing him to Germany. So as a daughter of an economist who worked for Kwame Nkrumah at the time where the visions were blooming and you had so many hopes and expectations for the future, it's today, it's a quite depressive situation to see how we can't liberate ourselves as it was some decades ago. And that's just a little anecdote.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you very much. So it's the end SARS now that came to me, also because of solidarity and how sometimes, in the specific sense of end SARS, which was happening in Nigeria, one would think that it's quite distant from you and therefore it doesn't concern you, or it's not your concern, as Nigerians will say. But we are very much implicated in somebody's suffering, so another one's suffering is our own suffering. It's quite like the first quote also. You cannot, how can you walk around on your tiptoes? These days, also because of the woke revolution, there are certain things we would have taken for granted in the past that now have become such contentious issues that you have had to, or one has had to censor themselves in thinking, in communicating. I just saw even Kwame Nkrumah's quote that the scholar must be aware of his. And then I'm sure in current days, Kwame Nkrumah will be probably cancelled. That why is he only thinking of a scholar as a he? And that maybe to revise it will say one must be conscious of their. But then if we are to split hairs on some of these things, it could be a problem to our solidarity. But we must also be aware. I think this is where it is. We must be aware of these differences and see how they play. Thank you.
The first quote reminds me of, I think Kari's, is it a Akan proverb, which we share with us in Uganda, which I said, if you need to see bubbles while peeing, you should pee on the same spot than peeing around. So I think the first quote reminds me of that. I'm not sure I'm saying it well. I think maybe Kari should help me.
Yeah, maybe the Ghanaians who speak Twi already know the proverb I'm referring to. Yes, it's about concentrating the direction of your urine. I don't mean it in a sexist way. I think it plays both ways. Concentrating it at least historically at a target such that you can release more bubbles rather than spreading it around and not seeing any bubble. Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. Obviously, all of these were my images. In terms of what they mean to me, the one on the extreme left, the heads, is an artist from Chicago called Nick Cave, who is depicting slavery. Hopefully, is obvious to you. And the one beneath that is from a museum in Liverpool, it was. And they had a whole installation on Benin, the war, the British incursion, and so on. And there were some very triggering pictures of what had been done to the Oba of Benin. For the rest of the afternoon, I just kept trying to think of somebody who had been so dehumanized and their treasures had been taken away. But the visa denial one is extremely real for me. Fortunately, I have 2 passports. I have one that can take me almost anywhere, and then I have the other one that is the best passport for traveling in Africa. The Ghana passport can get me places, and as soon as they see it, the immigration officers are ready to chat with me. They'll mention some Ghanaian musician or Ghanaian footballer, and then I'm like, I'm in. But because of the border visas, my colleagues, my students have struggles moving. I have a student now who was supposed to go to university in, I forget which university in Germany. He should have been there in September. He has a visa appointment for February of next year. It's like, people have written. And I have said, as part of my small act of solidarity, if you're inviting me, and because I have the other passport and I can come within a week, and my people are not coming with me, you won't see me. Right? I'm not coming without my people. You guys have to fight for all of us. It's not like, Akosua is an easy invite because we are not going to struggle with visas for her. It's like me and my people. My people are not coming, I'm not there. It's a small act of solidarity. And talking about cancel, I was looking on the internet yesterday. There's a website. It's actually a Jewish website, and they have been cataloging cancellations since the 7th of October of major public artistic events, music, mainly music and art. There have been 24. It's like almost every day something has been cancelled or somebody has cancelled themselves. We're not going to thrive in this community that you guys are building with that. It's just, I mean, you know, who is going to interpret my work as being problematic? So I said I was going to talk about humanity and solidarity, and I want to say a little bit about Akan notions of personhood. I'm not a philosopher, so I'm learning from people like Kwame Jechi and Abraham and a few others. So a lot of the philosophies are built into, I'm sure, you know, the Akan art scholars here can say this better than me, but I'm the one sitting here, so you have to hear me. A lot of philosophies in the Adinkra symbols, right? So if you know them and you know how to read them and how to use them, a lot of these messages about who we are can be conveyed, and you'll find them everywhere. One of the most famous ones is Jinyame. It refers to the omnipotence of God. And people have appropriated it or used it or employed it in diverse ways. You'll find even corporate organizations who are using Adinkra symbols to convey their mission statement. I mean, we can think of it what we will, but it tells us the ongoing salience of these symbols and the huge potential that they have for educating on a variety of philosophical lessons, but I would be arguing in terms of the human destiny that we share. And it has been argued by some that, you know, African people, we just have this communal and community identity, and we are very, you know, you have to subscribe to what the community says, and the individuality takes a second step. And Kwame Jechi has argued that this is not necessarily the case, that there isn't a contradistinction or there isn't a contradiction in the two. It's similar to the way in which when you read sociological texts, we are told that Europeans have nuclear families, and as for us, we have extended families, right? I mean, what's an extended family? An extended family, as understood, has to be built on nuclear families. I mean, people have spouses and children who are then related to other members of the community. And so one has to be really careful in the way in which we essentialize each other's cultures. Anyway, so Jechi argues that Akan thought ascribes definite value to the individual, their uniqueness, and thus their freedom of choice. And he cites an Akan proverb, which translated would be, all persons are children of God, no one is a child of the earth. So a person is conceived as a theomorphic being, having their nature and soul, their kra, their soul, coming from the omnipotent God. And this means that you have a certain unique individuality that comes from the Creator, which has intrinsic value as a unique individual of whom there is no other. And that this only conflicts with your neighbor when you want something and they want something else, and both of you can't have it. And this is where the community has to come in to ensure that there is balance, right? And so you need wise people and you need time. You are not able to say, okay, I need this thing solved right now. You need to hear everybody out, and you need to make people feel that they are heard and that they are understood. And it comes, he argues, out of an appreciation and respect of this individuality that is comes from being made in the image of God. There's a saying on there, benkum dware nifa, nifa dware benkum. Literally, the left hand washes the right hand washes the left hand. And remember, I'm trying to talk about solidarity. The understanding is that we cannot live without each other. And in that spirit of benkum dware nifa, nifa dware benkum, however well endowed I am materially, intellectually, and so on, I recognize that there's a mutuality and a reciprocity going on. It extends into gift giving. And so it is not always only, and it should not always only be the person who is more materially endowed who shares with the other person. So this notion that I'm a professor and my student who I know is struggling to pay her school fees comes and says, Prof, I went to Tamale and I brought you a tuber of yam, and then I'll say, oh no, Ekuya, you shouldn't have, because I know that she's struggling. If I do that, I'm suggesting to her the hierarchical relationship. I'm also suggesting to her that I will never be in need. You know, I should always be the one supporting her. Last month, I gave her a little bit to help her with her school fees, and maybe next month she's late with, you know, some project assignment because she hasn't paid something, I'll help her. It's a two-way relationship. So what she has been able to bring me in this moment in time is a tuber of yam. And I must humbly and graciously accept it, knowing that benkum dware nifa, nifa dware benkum, and mresisa, times change. I will not always be a professor. One day I'll be retired, and if I live long, an old lady sitting at home. And I'll be yearning for that tuber of yam, right? So I should know how to accept and to receive that now. And it is this spirit of solidarity that I am saying we must intentionally seek in recognizing our humanity in the other person. And it is in the language, it is in the partnership agreements that we write, it is in the measure of what, as people who travel the globe, we think we are receiving in other places and we think we are giving. Because for those of us in the academy, very often the partnership agreements are so constructed that, okay, some organization in the global north is bringing $2 million or 2 million euro, right? And maybe the partner in the global, so-called global north, put more time into putting that project proposal together because the funding agency says that the principal investigator must come from there. If you then come and think that because you facilitated $2 million, maybe my work hours in that proposal were 25 or 30%. You fail to see the work that my students who take you shopping to look for baskets, the other one who takes you because you wanted to drink palm wine and spent half the day traveling around the city looking for fresh palm wine. These are investments of time, energy, commitment, and love, right? And fellowship that cannot simply be measured in euro, dollar, yen, whatever terms. So I'm not sure how much of this you can see, but I just have some suggestions on some of the things that we can do more intentionally as we work in a spirit of transfer. And so I will read them in case you can't see, and I myself am struggling to see them. So the first one says, transformative. We must look at the structures that undermine our societies. The different societies that we come from. What are the structures that undermine societies in Germany? What are the structures that undermine societies here? And understand each other's struggles. So, for example, I find it very disconcerting. I send an email to somebody that I'm sorry, I'll not be able to send whatever it was by Friday. A very dear friend of mine passed away, and we're visiting the family, and I'm feeling a little out of sorts. And then the response, and can I, I'll need an extra 2 weeks. The person responds and says, "Oh, Akosua, no problem. Have an extra 2 weeks." Not a word of compassion towards me. That Akosua, oh, I'm sorry, your friend died. Really, you must be in a bad place. How are you feeling? I'm really sorry about it. Don't worry. Take 2 weeks, but if you need a little bit, like not a single word. Are you not a human being? Did you not just read that I said somebody close to me passed away? We have to, and I accuse myself sometimes because I find myself, I need to move. So somebody comes into my office, then the Ghanaian thing, you are supposed to ask them, how are you doing? How's your mother? How's your father? It's like, Charlie, let's get on with the business. As a human being, this is important to somebody. And we need to stop and pause and hear and listen and feel. And so I need to understand, now that I'm sitting in Kassel, that a lot of the students who are supposed to be helping me are temporary or part-time, and they are stressed and overwhelmed. So as I am moaning that German bureaucracy, these are real young people who are struggling. They don't have full-time positions and so on. It requires me to understand the structural systems troubling there. We need to recognize our diversity with our shared history and contemporary realities. I think that goes without saying. We need to conceptualize and explain our experiences. I'm saying the African experience because typically our knowledge has been undervalued and under-recognized. So there's a way in which extra effort has to be made to understand that. We need to recognize that our relationships are intersectional, right? I'm not just a woman, I'm not just a professor. I have a certain age, I come from a certain ethnic group, I have a certain marital status, I have a status as a mother, as a daughter, and a certain religion, a certain sexuality. We need to understand these. It's not that we are going looking for them, but we need to understand these as we come across them. And our struggles need to intersect. I can't say that, oh, as for me, I'm only interested in rural women and how they are struggling to sell their maize. The urban women also have struggles. The elite women also have struggles. And we can't say that we need to read our struggles together. We need to actively listen and recognize and understand and develop tools and methodologies. And I think art is one of the most powerful ways of having tools and methodologies that people can immediately interact with. Because let's face it, how many people are reading the journal articles that we write, right? And even when they read them, it's like we're writing big English and jargon and they can't understand it. So the power is here in things like this. Reciprocity, we've talked about that, and appreciating and highlighting also what other people have. I just have, women that I enjoy and I appreciate, and I will read their quotes because they are very empowering. And then Kwasi will help me to play a video that ends us on hopefully a high note. So let me quote Wangari Maathai, under whose professorship I'm sitting in Kassel. She says, "No matter how dark the cloud, there's always a thin silver lining. And that is what we must look for. The silver lining will come. If not to us, then to the next generation or the generation after that. And maybe with that generation, the lining will no longer be thin." And this is a woman who had to struggle for the environment, for rural women, for democracy in Kenya. And really, that led eventually to her death. But she got the Nobel Prize. Mercy Amba Oduyoye is a Ghanaian feminist theologian, and she says, "We challenge each other, therefore, to seek a new community of men and women engaged in a theology of relationships that would bring us closer to human life as God desires it." And if Kwasi will play a video for us. This is a group called Playing for Change, and you'll see what they do. It's, people are playing in different parts, and they have a song by Stevie Wonder that is it's a call for us, to rise up and do what it is that we can and that we should do. And those who want to move, please move. You get the message. It's a metaphor for what we can do together, and it has to be intentional. If there's anything that you will remember, it's that it's not happenstance. It has to be intentional, and it's difficult, and we have to get over our own prejudices. The prejudices are there. They come from the society and our upbringing, but it's to recognize them, overcome them, and move, recognizing that all of us, our blood is red. And when you're in the emergency room, some people have been known to reject some people's blood, but maybe they didn't want to live. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Akosua. Thank you. There's still time. We have about 10 minutes before we dip. Any comments, contributions are welcome. Please raise a hand. The microphone will come to you. For me, the question of solidarity today is a strong one, which comes with certain implications, like particularly when you are operating, like you alluded to mentioning, operating from a space like ours, where marked by we summarize it as a condition of hopelessness, because you are economically deprived, you are infrastructurally deprived, and it's not it is both an external and internal structure that is really oppressing you and keeping you in that space. But through that, there's still the possibility of creating new futures and realities, and that futural dimension is also important. Then you raise this issue about difference, which was also another important point for me. So, such that we are not smothering difference in our relationships of solidarity, which is crucial, because also sometimes you get the impression that nascent politics require this kind of consensus, you know, in order to operate, such that if you do not align with a particular ideology, there's no space for conversation, really. And how do we really deal with these tensions? And because we really don't, in relationships of solidarity, we cannot really all agree. We have perhaps a goal or a common aim, which we work towards, but we don't have to flatten the differences that come. On the point of gift giving, that's also another dimension that blaxTARLINES here in Kumasi, we kind of are preoccupied with, because when our politics is one of emancipatory politics, derived from Nkrumah and so on. And once you shift into that zone, and with art as the beginning point, we want to also create economies or relationships of mutual giving, which is not necessarily based on exchange value, which we have in the capitalist status quo, which means that, how do you gift without expecting anything back? How do you exhaust yourself in what you have, giving, in such a radical form, without necessarily expecting anything back, and or without necessarily relying on the reciprocal action. And this is work that Caricature Seidu has done, very theoretically, but also practically through his work. And part of the benefits that we see here is a result of that. Ibrahim Mahama also has this pulsating at the core of what we are experiencing here, And so, but if we multiply this, what happens? So this is really the question. And if there are any comments, please, I'll come to you. Any questions? A microphone. We have one mic now because our battery died, but we are going to buy new batteries. Any questions, please? Comments, contributions, reflections, anecdotes, counter perspectives. Double A.
Thank you very much for this. I think it's very interesting that you talk about this potential of the arts, and I would like to loop it back, also being an architect, into like the notion of shared space, like where all that can happen. And I think we are sitting here now in the Parliament of Ghosts, which is, I think, the ultimate shared space. And I think it would be wonderful to see a list of people who crossed through this space and have been in conversations. I also think like what Caricature Seidu and Bernhard and others, what you're teaching in Kumasi is like also sending your young artist students into the city. And that's another way of creating shared spaces. And I think that's like, because there was a time in my, I think it was at the end of my architectural education where I, as a thesis project, proposed a network of ephemeral spaces in Kumasi. And then some very short time later, I worked with a Congolese choreographer in Kisangani, being his architect. And then at one point, when I was so interested in temporary spaces, he gave me this sentence: if my frame is not solid enough, it cannot withstand all the winds coming from outside. And that really is with me ever since in my architectural thinking, and also like what is needed in environments like that, and that the physicality of shared spaces is relevant. Maybe you want to somehow comment on this notion of shared spaces?
I think you put it very aptly, and we are not in the modern urban space. We are not used to. We kind of want to reject this shared space. It's like, first of all, my personal space, don't come too close to me, and then if I can, I should have my own room. But we grew up eating. I grew up eating together with people, not in my nuclear family. Eating from the same pot. When I would visit my grandparents, all the grandchildren would sit around and eat from the same pot. And you're eating with your hands. I mean, and the space is open like this, right? So I can only, concur with what you're saying, but it goes against, it's back to the capitalist self-interest, self-preservation mode that is telling you it shouldn't be open. Right? It shouldn't be open. First of all, it's a security issue. Hey, Ibrahim, why don't you have big bars, on the doors? Because somebody is going to come in. They've just realized the value of all these things, so they'll come in and steal them. And well, there are also some poor people who need prayer mats, so they will come and take the prayer mat. So you need to lock the space. So it's intentionality, and it's a risk. So, one of the questions I'm asking is, what are we willing to risk for all of this? If we want to have these shared spaces, what are we? I have to be willing to have a level of discomfort, because at the end of the day, we need other people. I mean, an island might be nice, but after 2 weeks, you're tired of it, I suppose, right? So I guess the metaphor, is really apt. And I just want to say one thing, because I referred to Akan and Asante and sharing and so on. Asante people are hardworking, productive, progressive. You need to produce and get wealth. It's understood, but it is also understood that the fingers are not equal. So there will always be somebody who needs a little bit more help, either forever or for a season. And you have to create, they might be a nuisance to you at some point, but you have to create space for them so that they can survive and thrive. And also there's a little bit of self-interest in there, because if they don't survive and thrive, they're also going to be a burden to you, right? So the whole spirit of reciprocity and recognizing each other's humanity, there's some self-interest in there. Because if you think in the long term, we can't survive without each other. We can't survive without the other species that we are working so hard to destroy and annihilate and get rid of. But because we think in these short-term political capitalist 4 or 5 year cycles, we fail, to see the long term. And if you think spiritually, that is not, when I'm dead, that's not the end of me, and there are also my descendants who need to survive, then it becomes, even more profound. And I know I've been meandering. I told you that old academics talk a lot.
It's totally fine. Yeah.
Thank you once again for your presentation. So maybe I'm trying to speak to paradoxes, and because Bebel has spoken, I want to relate to a particular project she did, and I don't know whether you may respond to it, but it was this issue of difference, recognizing differences. Bebel, you did a project in Guabuliga, and in wishing to use indigenous knowledge and technology to build a space, the king or the chief wanted development for his people. And so your ideas of return to indigenous practices and his ideas of progress came at loggerheads. So this, for me, is an example of some of these differences that we must recognize. That being said, the projects were done anyway, and Bebel has kept returning to those places. So when you speak of difference, how does it also work, Prof, in your own work? And you've mentioned some, but sometimes the difference is also within your primary or principal place of work, Ghana. How has those played out, particularly at the Institute of African Studies? And what is in it for the future?
Yeah, thank you for that and for giving me space to talk about some of my personal stuff. I think when I joined the university, I didn't realize that universities are actually very conservative spaces. You know, I didn't realize. It took me a while. I think today people learn it faster. I thought you come, you do what you want to do, creative, academic freedom. And I have to say, in those early years, I joined the university in 1989. You know, you could pretty much do what you wanted to do from a research and teaching perspective. But when it came to the administrative layers and the committees and the, you know, firstly, very bureaucratic and of course, very conservative. Oh no, we can't change this. This is how we've always done it. Oh, you can't do it that way. Okay, you are in African studies. Yeah, maybe you can do it this way. So as I have grown older, I have learned to listen more, because as the example you gave of the chief, I think is a very perfect example. You have your development. You've come from Europe. You have skyscrapers and beautiful buildings, and then you want me not to build with concrete. I'm not saying that's what happened, but you don't want me to build with concrete. You want me to build with bricks or with clay. Are you saying that that's what I deserve? You know, I'm the backward person who should have the house with clay and with thatch because it's indigenous and so on. So it takes a lot of conversation to persuade somebody that, you know, it's not about the backwardness of it. It's about that actually this is more environmentally friendly for you. Right? It's like when we talk about climate change and the carbon footprint. We're telling people to stop emitting gases. And they are saying, well, we are now in our industrial revolution. You polluted for 400 years. And now it's our turn to also industrialize at hyper speed. And you want us to stop, right? So, you know, there has to be something in it for me in order to be persuaded. And then ultimately, maybe I'll be also intellectually persuaded. And I know it's hard, and we're working with time and with money. And you know that what you are prescribing, maybe a herbal drug, is better than some chemical that somebody is swallowing. But they are persuaded that they need to go to the hospital, get somebody to prescribe something. And so if I'm not persuaded, then, you know, we sharpen the differences. So I guess what I'm saying is that having, having the experience of years, just to be patient to have these conversations with people, you know, I guess in a situation like this, maybe show people pictures that actually there are also buildings in Europe that are made of, these materials from the earth. There are people who are going back to it because they realize it's better. Do you know that the people who live in this community actually live longer and have fewer lung diseases as a result of it? Oh, is it true? Yeah. I can even show you a video clip where 100-year-old man is saying it. Ah, okay, all right, maybe you have a point. Okay, I'll consider it. Not for my palace, but you do it for the school, you know. Oh, I see that the school actually is great. Please come and build my palace that way, right? But this is not overnight. And people need to be persuaded, because we tend to be suspicious of difference because we don't understand it, right? And as for at the University of Ghana, many struggles. But I'm here, I'm alive, you know. People insult you, say things about you, you know. I can't even go into some of the. But I also I was surprised that caricature could become a dean, because people who are outside the box, normally people will do everything in their power so that you don't make it into the administrative route. Let me give you one anecdote. At some point, I was running for council, the highest advisory body in the university. And I didn't realize that there was an incumbent who could go for a second term, some older big professor, a man. And so I said, oh, I was going to step back. And the registrar said, Akosua, I'm not going to let you step down. So I went on the campaign trail. There are some people who thought, oh, this feminist woman. I carried my husband in my armpit to show that I'm a good wife. So if you vote for me, you are not going to be threatened. Okay, we can criticize that kind of politics, but, and I went from department to department. And at the time, my husband was working at the biggest hospital in Accra. He wasn't in the medical school, but he worked in the Ministry of Health. So again, I carried him and another colleague in my armpit. We went from doctor to doctor. They said, oh, you, this woman, you are very humble. The other person didn't even come here. So we will vote for you. And I believe, and on that occasion, the two of us who were going in on the academic route to council, both of us women, made it. And I want to say with due modesty that I think we did some shaking there and brought about some changes and prevented certain decisions. And we would do our homework. We would come with facts, because if you come with emotion, you've prepared, you've got the facts to try to convince people that this is the better way. And as I said to somebody, in the Institute of African Studies, we always invoke the spirit of Kwame Nkrumah. So it's very difficult for people to, to fight against us. It's like, oh, this is what Nkrumah wanted. This is what, okay, all right, you guys get on with it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And maybe permit me to add another thought. It's on an old-fashioned idea, such as is called love. Secular love, radical love, the kind that people like James Baldwin, people like Bell Hooks, people like Toni Morrison have already, talked about in the context of emancipatory politics. If we think of politics as Alain Badiou, the French philosopher, claims that it's the creation of new possibilities. What we are doing is we are creating new possibilities within a system, within a status quo. And so there's this immanence that is happening there that the tension is already by acting on that impulse, you're already, it's engendered with that tension. So how do we, I think G.K. Chesterton, another, theologian, thinks about it in this way. He says, how do you despise the world in its current constellation? I'm just paraphrasing. Despise it in its current constellation, but love it enough to think it worth changing. I think that this paradox is at play in the politics that we espouse to kind of exit these inegalitarian frameworks. Do we have any comments? Anyone? We have one more, a short reflection. It can also be a 30-second one. We'll set an alarm. Okay.
Ivy, yeah.
Oh.
Okay, I don't think mine will be 30 seconds though. So I would like to react to or pick up from where you left it from the idea of reciprocity. Yeah, I think art can allow from a certain level of reciprocity, but if we can also think of a non-reciprocal approach to art making, what could that yield? Which I think SCCA blaxTARLINES is trying to build upon. I think the other day I was schooled by Jihan El Tahari's film on Cuba and their assistance to the African Revolution. One of the striking ones was the fact that they have to come to the jungle of Congo and stay with them. How do I say? Yeah, the other factions that was against Mobutu's regime, they failed and then went back to Guinea to impact on that. Later on, they went back to Angola, and the Angola situation was quite different because there were 3 liberation movements which were fighting to overthrow the colonial regime, and they were at loggerheads. Then they met somewhere in, I think, in Portugal, in Lisbon, and they decided to settle on a date for independence. So each one was fighting to own Luanda on that day. Then one of them sought for the help of South Africa, and at the time they were in that was during the apartheid movement. And another one also sought for the help of Cuba. And during that instance, when they went there, Fidel Castro was like, "Oh, what you're proposing is not enough. You're asking for peanut. Let me give you something much more that will help you." So they send missiles, ammo, cars, and so on that could help fight and win the battles. And in the course of doing that, they have to later on settle between the Cubans and the other liberation movement and the South African and one of the liberation movements. They have to settle the case in Egypt. And later on, they decided that the Cubans would leave and so on and so forth. But when the Cubans, afterwards, the liberation movement that was helped by the Cubans won the case, and then they took, their leader became the president. But one of the striking things was that the Cubans, when they were leaving, they didn't pick anything from Congo because, from Angola, because they had the chance to maybe excavate the diamonds and then take petrol and so on and so forth. But they didn't pick anything. They left with their soldiers, and even their dead body, they picked them and buried them in Cuba. I think we can also learn something from politics, geopolitics, concerning probably a non-reciprocal gift can also be possible in certain circumstances. Thank you.
Break now. We have an hour. We come back here at 1:30, and then we take the presentations, the virtual sessions with Professor Klaus Weber and Dr. Thorsten Hazer, who will join us via Zoom. So let's meet here in an hour. Thanks. Is that 2? 2 here?